Welcome to the webinar. My name is Erin Reed and I'm with Polaris MEP. Today is our second day of a week-long series called 5S Lean and COVID-19. And we are excited to be able to present a variety of ideas inspired by the 5S Lean principle that can help you both get back to business and get back to better in the weeks and months to come. For those of you who haven't joined me yet, I just want to make sure that you know how you can send us questions, submit troubleshooting needs, etc. And that is by using the chat feature in your Zoom control bar. Other than the speaker, I am going to keep us all muted. That's because we are recording this session for folks who haven't been able to join us, and we want to be able to hear Polaris MEP Project Manager Ted Kennedy clearly throughout. So please do use that chat function to let us know what you need. Today's session is focused on set in order, and I am excited that Ted will be leading us through the principle and getting us to some practical applications that we can use starting today. Ted?
Hi, my name's Ted Kennedy. I'm a project manager at MEP. I have an industrial engineering background. I've worked in many different industries, and the last company I worked at previous to joining Polaris was an automotive parts manufacturer. In that role, I did lots of lean projects involving setting up warehouses, pick and pack operations, creating flexible work cells, and also implementing ERP systems and designing software. I've learned through the importance of the SET principle throughout my time doing industrial engineering, and I'm going to go through some of it with you today. Yesterday, Nathan Bonds, who I work with, introduced the 5S framework, and the first S, sort. Sort is getting all the unneeded items, materials, equipment out of the area, and now you're left with what you really need. Today, we're going to be going through the understanding of the SET principle and 5 ideas on how to apply it due to the coronavirus challenges. At the end of this, we'll have time for a Q&A period, so please submit your questions to Erin. Once the first S sort is completed, you now have only the tools and components and items that you really need at the workplace. Now you've got to select a place for each item to be positioned and mark it clearly. Once the items are set in place, you want to make it very visible to everyone where they go when they're stored and if they're missing. So you can see from the picture on the left, that's a cleaning station that was set up. Every item or every tool needed for the cleaning station is marked. That's considered like a shadow board. So there's a shadow for each item. So every item is put back into place on the shadow board when it's not in use. By using this system, you can always tell if something's missing or where it goes to when it's put into its proper place. The SET principle can also be used in storage locations. This is a storage location I had set up, and you can see there's lots of different parts stored in the location. Some parts have more than one roller location set to it. The locations were set based on the number of maximum parts that you should keep in stock. So if an item only needs 3 lanes of material, that's all that was set up for. And if it goes over that number, it becomes very visible if there's extra inventory in the building. It's very useful using this. It's the SET principle for storage locations. Does your workplace look like this? If there's not a unique place for every designated item, the item will eventually become misplaced. This leads to reduced productivity and the introduction of quality problems. The benefits of the 5S set in order include increased productivity, higher quality, greater employee satisfaction, and a safer work environment, especially with COVID-19, which I will go over next. A well-organized workspace is efficient and productive. You make it visual so you can tell exactly what is supposed to happen and where everything goes. A well-organized environment is also cleaner and safer, which is the way set in order helps with coronavirus. It's easy to see which items on the cot have been cleaned already because it's very well organized. The cot is set on a specific location on the floor to help with the social distancing in the building. But we can also set it in a more effective way, which brings me to tip number 1. When setting up a 5S tool board like this shadow board shown, you can add a cleaning log. This log will show when the tooling has been cleaned on a periodic basis and can really help keeping employees safe, which reduces downtime due to COVID-19. So it's very useful for that. I think the only way to really do it properly is have it organized with the cleaning log. If it's disorganized, you'll never work. And all that's using the set principle. The set in order can also be used for safety for the worker, and also for COVID-19 distancing. What's shown on the screen now is the average distances a human being reaches with their arms. So you can use this to determine where to locate the items when you're setting them at the workstation. You don't want people to reach for frequently used objects and long distances. The longer the reach distance, the longer it takes to do the operation. When you're looking at your operation, you got to take a look at the parts flowing through the operation. This is an example of, this is called the spaghetti diagram. It shows all the different operations each part goes through. So you can see product number 1 starts at operation A, goes to F, goes to D, and it continues down using the orange lines to the finished goods area. Each one of those moves has a number in between it. That's the number of steps it takes to go from one operation to the other. So from operation A to operation F takes 10 steps. So when you add up all those steps to complete product 1, it shows at the top of the table, it takes 130 steps to complete the product. You do this product 50 times a week, you do these moves. So now you're doing 6,500 steps per week. Each one of those steps is an employee walking throughout the building, which can help with the spread of the COVID-19 virus. So this is something we do not want to do. We want to limit the number of steps. And we can do that by setting things in the proper locations. Tip number 2 on using SET against the coronavirus is to use totes with pickup and drop-off locations. That way you can keep people from constantly going into another person's workspace. And it helps with every team member. It will help them follow the distancing guidelines that we're trying to do. We can have pickup station or cost-specific areas which can be set up by pot-specific or process-specific methods. Tip number 3 is to prevent cross-contamination by keeping people out of the areas they don't belong in. Do not let them wandering around the building. Everybody walks in certain locations. So if they're going to get pots between operations, they can go to the tote pickup area, which is a designated area, instead of wandering around the building looking for the pots. Transfers between people can be done with totes, or it could be custom designed. This is a pallet that I helped design that transfers assemblies from one operator to another in a large work cell. The assemblies can be set up in specific locations. This also helps increase the output greatly and makes everything very visual, so you know if all the assemblies are installed into the larger assembly. So the larger assembly on the left on this pallet is the one that's being, all the pots are going into, and the pots on the right on this pallet must all go into the larger assembly during the assembly process. So if any pots are missing, if any pots are still on this pallet at the end of the assembly operations, then you know they did not go into the larger assembly and that you've got a missing pot problem. So it's very useful for that also. But this clearly shows how to use the set principle in doing work in the building, and how it becomes very visible that something's not working properly. It's not going as planned. This is, I took a meat packing plant because they had so many virus problems. And you can see how the people are working so close to each other. And you know that this is not supposed to happen now. We need barriers in between the people and keep the proper 6 feet or more social distancing. We need everybody to keep separated as much as possible. We need everything made very visible to do this. And we've got to keep the number of people moving in the building. And all of this can be done using the set principle. The set principle can be used to highlight where each piece of equipment is located, and of course the aisles. The aisles should be marked very distinctly. Yellow is usually a good way to mark the aisles. It's very visible. And ideally, the aisles would be one direction. So that way you don't have people crossing each other when they're walking in the building. Also, you can mark off where people are to stand and when they're not supposed to stand. I suggest using tape for this. One company I worked at painted the floor with the aisles and the equipment. And then within a year or two, additional equipment came in the building. We had to move all the equipment around. And now we had a big problem with the floor paint on the aisles did not match where the current aisles were with the new arrangement. So it caused a big issue. So tape is very good to use for this, especially if you're gonna keep your operation flexible, your setup. We can also mark where people are standing using the set. Many manufacturers have had a rule that employees cannot use elevators at all. But if you have to, this is a clever idea a company came up with, having everybody face the opposite directions. Unfortunately, the people in this did not wear face masks, which they should be using. But you can use set to set safe behaviors in your building with the way where people are stopping in the building and setting their body. You can also use it in the office environment. This is an example of an office setup, and on the black area is like the social distancing area for the person at the desk needs. And in this one, it would be also good to have people walk in one direction within the office, so again, they're not crossing paths. But this is a good example of this using set also, setting the safety distances on the floor. Another thing that you could do in the production area is to turn your work cells into safety zones. A work cell can be created by putting all of the needed components and tooling around the operator. This way, the operator is working in the work cell and they do not need to leave the work cell. Materials all set up and supplied from the rear of the work cell, so even the material handler doesn't work into the work cell. I've did this in a number of locations, and it really increases the productivity of the operation. So You do not have anybody standing up and moving from their work location. All the pots are fed to the operator, so there's no disruption in the workflow from the worker doing the operation. This is an example of a work cell. It's just a simple example. As you can see, all of the pots are fed down roller conveyors to the worker in the middle. The worker turns and does all the different processes. I made it simple on this one. Each process is 10 seconds each. And so it takes 80 seconds to do the operation. And then the finished output goes off on another roller conveyor. By doing it this way, nobody has to enter the worker's workspace. So it kind of creates like a safety zone. So you can easily get the 6 foot or more safety zone by doing setting up your production operation in this fashion. You can also do it with connecting work cells or workstations together, as shown on the screen. This is shows 2 different work cells connected with a simple roller conveyor. So the roller conveyor could use totes or any other way to flow down the roller conveyor, but the totes work very well. This setup like this can be done very inexpensively with the roller conveyors, and I've done a lot of these operations over the years, and it works really well, and it's very, very efficient. You set up the work cells based on the customer's tact time, which is another subject, but the customer's demand. So you try to get the times the operators are processing the pots to be equal to the customer demand. That also cuts down on your work in process in your building and saves money on inventory. This is an example of a workstation I set up in a work cell. It was an 18-person work cell. So this is, it's actually the same pallet I showed earlier going around on a little conveyor down the work cell. So you can see all the pots being fed to the operator. All of the pots are situated so that they're closest to where they're used, closest as possible and feasible. So this was a very efficient work cell, but over time on this specific work cell, we had to increase the customer, due to the customer demand increasing 10%, we had to increase the output of this work cell 10%. A lot of this was done by resetting where the pots were. I did a number of labor studies on each one of these workstations in the cell and found better positions for the pots to be stationed at. And I was able to cut the time down at each workstation by doing that and also improving the tooling operations a little. And we did attain the 10%. Even though some of the tooling, like you can see the hanging screwdriver, was set up so that it limited the reach distance needed to do the operations. Small little improvements, such as the reach distances, can really make a lot of difference in your output of your workstations. Now we're going to do the question and answer period.
Yeah,
if anybody has any questions.
Definitely are. So Ted, actually, the first question seems to relate to what you were just talking about. You said that you had created this whole system with all the parts and pieces, but then you went back and changed it for more productivity. So the first person has asked me, what if you set up a system like what you had done with parts, etc., and then parts come in that don't fit?
Well, that's a good question. So for instance, on the material storage area that I showed, they had roller conveyor lanes for each pot. That was set up so that the maximum amount of pots that should be in the building could fit in the lane. If more pots came in of the particular pot number and it did not fit in the lane, the pots were put in an overflow area above the storage rack. When people see that there's an overflow above the storage rack, they have to take action. That means somebody over-ordered the pots. and that you have too much inventory in the building. Either that or your volume is going up and you have to reset up your storage facility, the storage location. So the set principle does not have to be set in stone. It can be flexible, and it's going to flex the way the operation runs. But it does show that an abnormal situation is developed if it's not, things can't be set up, if something unusual or different comes into the workstation, and that action should be taken of some sort.
Excellent. All right. So the next question is actually related to the work cells and the workstations. And this person asks, how long does it take to set up or to transform a work cell into a safety zone, like what you were talking about and showing earlier?
I've done it within an hour or two, or it could take a whole day or two. It depends upon the amount of equipment that has to be relocated to create the work cell. Plus, you have to do some labor studies to make sure what you're putting in the work cell will meet, the output of it will meet the customer demand. But it could be done very quickly. It depends upon the situation. There's no set time on doing something like that.
Again, it sounds like flexibility is a real key point that you're saying. Even though you're setting things in order, you also have to be flexible to change it with new protocols, new pieces, things like that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so the next comment says that, do you have any suggestions or tips on floor prep for floor taping? You suggested floor taping over painting. Any suggestions for making it stick longer?
There are certain tapes that stick longer. There are tapes made just for going onto the floors. My previous company, we used a pretty good tape, but it wasn't the top of the line tape, so you had to retape it every few months. But it does work out very well, and it's very visual, and it's very good to do if your work space is changing over time. And I would suggest trying to set up one-way aisles as much as possible. In my previous company, we set up a lot of one-way aisles because we had the people walking within the same aisles as the material flows. So we found it much safer that the pallets of material were flowing in the same direction as the people walking. It was much safer. And plus, with the COVID-19, to keep people separated, you don't want people crossing within the aisles. So it's much safer also to do it that way.
Yeah, so
It's a good thing to look at your building layout, and maybe you reconfigure things a little so that you have a better work flow in the building, material flow and people flow, especially with COVID-19.
It's interesting you say that, because one of the other questions, or maybe it was kind of more of a comment, was that they noted that in the work cell that you showed, which had so many parts to it, that it had plexiglass dividers. Was that for COVID-19 or was it before COVID-19?
No, this was pre-COVID-19. Yeah, well, some of the equipment, we are very safety oriented, so some of the equipment needed plexiglass enclosures so that the people can't get their hands hurt. So we use a lot of plexiglass enclosures and vision systems to make sure, sensors to make sure somebody's hand wasn't in the within the area of the equipment. Some equipment you hit the buttons and you can, if it's set up improperly, the person can put their hand under the tooling and get your hand damaged. I've seen that over the years, so you got to really watch how you set equipment up, and you got to make it so it's no way of getting people's hands can get into where the tooling is. So,
Sounds like another example of making a set in order decision that could help now for safety when we're talking something specific for COVID-19 versus long-term safety.
yes.
Operator safety. Excellent. Are there any considerations that you need to make for having line leaders or supervisors be able to approach the worker during the day? That's a question.
That's a good question. I would just try to use masks as much as possible. If you have to get into the work zone with the 6 feet, but it's preferable you don't have to. So I think most of the time, if you set up the work, if you can set up a work cell properly, people do not have to enter it very often, very infrequently, unless there's a quality issue, for instance. And in that case, a lot of times we've set up um, buttons in the workstation or the work cell where the operator hits the button and it turns a red light on over the work cell. And that tells that there's a quality issue and they need immediate assistance. Sometimes you use a red button for quality and another color button would hit like a blue light. That would mean the operator is running out of material, say. So a light system like that is very useful and it keeps people out of the area communicating with the operator. You just send signals in another fashion that you need help.
I'm struck because I'm still learning this 5S, you know, from your team, that's kind of also building on what Nathan talked about yesterday. The more visual you can make a system, right? So
Yes.
2 different colored lights give you a visual clue, prevents a person from having to leave their area, go into another, or somebody come into their safety zone. All visual
If you set the
cues.
work cell up properly, the person almost never has to leave their workstation. I've had people sit in their workstation for hours, you know, but except for breaks and lunch, never leaving it by setting up these workstations. And I've seen productivity increases 20, 30% doing that. Because as soon as somebody leaves the work cell, they always end up talking to other people. There's like
That
chatter
never
goes on.
happens. We
No,
don't
chatter
talk to our
goes
friends
on.
at work.
Chatter
Never.
goes on and you lose productivity. So that's what I've seen. So it creates
So
inefficiencies.
the next question is about, I guess, not really time spent chit-chatting with each other, but rather time in general. And the question is, how much time do you need to kind of give a system to be in place before you look at it again and figure out whether or not it should be set in a slightly different order?
I would do it immediately. I like to set them up, go through the 5S, set everything up, do the shine, standardize, go through the whole thing, and then if you have time, relook at it. The good thing about this set principle in 5S is you're setting all the tools and pots in certain locations. So this lets you set the time allowed for the person to do the job. If the pots or pots or the tooling are not always in the same location when they're doing the job, they never have the same time to do the work. The work time varies. So you set things up in the proper locations, the best locations you can come up with, get it, maintain the set, and then go back and revisit it and look to see if you can improve the location where they're set up. Most of the time, I get most of my best feedback from the operators doing the jobs. They have all the information. You can study it, but they'll tell you that something could be moved and made easier in another location. So if you work with the operators, you're going to get a lot of good feedback and really improve your operation.
I would think that that would be especially helpful as we're trying to mitigate COVID-19, right? They're going to tell you what's going to work and what's not for doing that regular disinfecting, for keeping their distance. And the other last question is regarding those work cells. Is it always going to be 6 feet of space between the operator and the other people, or could that vary as well? This person is asking.
No, it varies based on the size of the equipment, and you know, you have to. It's based on the way the operations that are going through. If you have large pots, you know, you're going to need a longer roller conveyor or conveyor to move them between the operators. So, but you should do at least 6 feet to keep them separated. But it definitely can vary. Sometimes you look at the size of the pot and how many pots are coming out of each work cell or workstation, and you got to flex the spacing a little. I've had an assembly that I had in between 2 workstations. That one workstation put some glue on the pot, and it had to be dry by the time it got to the next workstation. So they went down, they did go down a roller conveyor, but you had to space out the parts on the, you had to have enough space on the roller conveyor so that it took like 20 minutes for it to go from one station to the other, so that it was completely dry. So in that case, I needed a longer roller conveyor. That might have been a 10 or 12-foot roller conveyor. So you can run into situations like that where you do not want the part to immediately go to the next operator. But the closer you can get the parts to the, between operators, the less work in process you'll have between them, which is safer for quality reasons. You don't want one operator to be making too many bad parts, and then the next operator noticing, oh, look, you're making bad parts, and then there's hundreds of parts in between them. So try to limit the number of parts between the operators, but there may be reasons you want more, like for the glue drying that I told you about. So it can kind of vary based on the operation.
Yeah, so safety is obviously one of the big considerations that you're putting into these work cells and these safety zones, but also all of these other elements to make sure that it comes out with the fewest defects, best productivity, and moving forward as it needs to meet the customer demand. Yep. So yes. I believe that that is the last question. Oh, there was just a comment, which was a comment that perhaps there should be some consideration for cleaning computers and keyboards that have common use. Would that be another kind of idea of, if you know that everything's set in order, they also get cleaned frequently?
Yes. Yeah, that's definitely a good point. And one of the S's is actually cleaning, which I think we're going through tomorrow. So that would be a good session to look at. But anything that's in common use should be cleaned regularly between them. Ideally, if it's not an expensive item and you can put it within each person's work cell, then there's no cleaning, you don't have to clean regularly. So sometimes there's common items that maybe two people are using, yeah, but they're inexpensive. So the best thing in that case is to purchase another one so that they're not using common items,
yep,
if possible.
Yep. I'm remembering all those folks who had their names on their staplers so they wouldn't leave their desk. And that used to just be because they were annoyed not having a stapler. But now that's actually a really good way to make sure that you're not cross-contaminating.
Yeah, that's
you
true.
Set it in order on their desk, give it a label so it only belongs there, right?
Yeah, only you have that stapler.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I am now going to be quiet so that we can go ahead and get some final thoughts from you, Ted, about set in order and what might be some of the next steps for folks who are attending this webinar.
Well, I've covered 5 ideas that you can use for set in order for the coronavirus. Each one of them will increase productivity and help you keep people working safely, and will save time and money due to a well-defined visual organization. So I recommend that you now take, if you can, take the survey that we have. It's a survey on how well you're doing with your Lean 5S in your building. And if you take that, I think it's a self-assessment. It will give you an answer right at the end of it. And you can get an idea of some improvements or areas of improvement that you might want to look at. And if you need any help with implementing 5S, increasing productivity, setting up work cells or workstations, floor markings or markings of any sort, please give me a call or any of us at Polaris and we can help you. We're here to help the manufacturing companies in Rhode Island any way we can. So it was nice talking with all of you, and thank you for joining me on this call.